Thinking in circles, sustainable design and the circular economy. I'm guessing as you are here, you possibly have some knowledge of these terms, but don't worry if not, whether you're a creative, an environmentalist, or just a curious soul, together we can explore what they mean in relationship to our world and the environment, and to our worlds and the everyday life. To start this journey, I'm going to take us first to India. I've been studying, working and teaching in the creative industries for over 20 years now, overlapping fine art, design, making and education at various points over this time period. I was lucky enough to partake in an art residency in 2010 in the city of Bangalore in India, focusing on my practice as an artist. I had 6 weeks armed with a notebook and camera and whatever local resources I could utilise to create a solo exhibition at the art space I was participating with. I walked and explored, photographed and bought materials, hung out with the locals, commissioned local craftspeople, and generally overwhelmed myself in this explosion of colour, smell, sounds, symbolism and ritual. As an artist at this time, I was particularly interested in the status we place on the various objects in our lives and the spaces in which we utilise or display them. This took on a whole new angle when I got to India. Here, we come from a culture where there is an object for every activity possible. These objects usually are manufactured in factories throughout the globe and presented to us wrapped and virginal in window displays and on shop shelves, without us always being fully aware of their history. What fascinated me was that objects so often were given an extremely full and generous life in India, their history richly visible. Very often this was because of economic necessity. Objects are reused, reinvented, recycled and lived to their fullest, and their industry and production is often laid out in the streets for all to see. One street dedicated to metalwork, another to weaving, another to recycling. One object in question is the tarpaulin. It is used in housing families, demarking construction sites, wrapping piles of coconuts, covering market stalls and street vendors' wares. It can be an awning, a roof, an encasement and a wall, a toy, a shield of privacy and a dwelling. Saris had similar connotations. Not only is a sari layered in meaning and association dependent on its style, length and how it is worn, but it also can be used as a hammock-type crib for babies. It can be stretched out as a shelter, or sadly, in some cases, the noose when life has become too much. As you can see here, I have utilised them for my exhibition. Now, interestingly, all of these saris were claiming to be 5.5 metres long, and the cheaper ones cheated me out of quite a few centimetres. So how does this fit with our topic? For me, this experience hammered home our experience of objects in our consumerist world, presented to us in glossy magazines or on Instagram, in adverts and shop windows. I don't want to pretend this is a simplistic black and white viewing of consumption of things. It is a highly complex one that includes a growing population, manufacturing capabilities, economics, politics, and the psychology of consumption, to name just a few. What this does highlight, though, is that stuff gets made, stuff gets used, and then what? What's this stuff made from? Where does it come from? What processes are used in its making, and how does it get to us? And that's just the start. What happens when it breaks or we tire of it? Sometimes it may be repaired or recycled, sometimes composted. Often, though, it is discarded. And this is what we call the linear economy. Now, as we know, our climate is changing. We are polluting our planet and regularly seeing images of plastic oceans, polluted rivers, overflowing landfill sites, etc., etc. And the linear economy is part of this problem. Nothing is linear with a full stop. Waste must go somewhere. So let's look to nature for a little advice.
Living systems have been around for a few billion years and will be around for many more. In the living world, there's no landfill. Instead, materials flow. One species' waste is another's food, energy is provided by the sun, things grow, then die, and nutrients return to the soil safely. And it works.
This very simply describes a circular economy. So instead of a straight line with a landfill as a full stop, that landfill is replaced with repair, recycling, or biodegrading processes, helping to create a new material, which in turn helps create new products and allowing that line to join up as a circle.
And the circular
economy.
Circular economy is not simply about taking this line and doing more recycling and turning it into a circle. It's a much more fundamental shift in how we think and how we behave and how we consume. All other species adapt to their environment, adapt to their habitat and change in order to fit into that. But with us as a species, we actually change our environment and our habitat so that it suits us better.
Dame Ellen MacArthur, championed solo yachtswoman and now a champion of the circular economy through her organisation, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which these animations were sourced from, also helps explain this principle. A circular economy is based on the principles of designing out waste and pollution, keeping products and materials in use, and regenerating natural systems. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation is an excellent source to explore in relationship to this topic, covering science, economics, politics, design, and the environment. I have a raft of resources and links, etc., to pass on to any of you who are interested, covering the various areas of this talk, including the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. But I'll discuss that at the end and let you know where you can obtain these resources. I've recently discovered another amazing champion of this cause called Leila Ajalu, a designer, advisor, educator, and researcher on all aspects of sustainable design. As her website explains, she allows people to think differently about how the world works. She disrupts traditional ways of thinking and design. She has numerous talks and resources online that I will include in my resources so you can explore yourself. But when I was watching her TED talk, she said something in terms of sustainable design, which seems now very obvious, but was quite revelatory to me. I must admit, I do sometimes miss the obvious.
And everyone always says to me, oh, Leila, I just want the eco materials. And I say, well, that's very complex, and we'll have to spend 4 hours talking about what exactly an eco material means, because everything at some point comes from nature. And it's how you use the material that dictates the environmental impact.
So yes, of course, everything comes from nature. It's just that some of these things have been tampered with and experimented on, going through various processes to produce man-made materials such as plastics, concrete, and glass. Materials are important in our quest for a more sustainable approach to design. And as Leila notes, it's how they are used that determines environmental impact. I think, though, that the question of what kind of a designer or maker you are also dictates the level of importance on the material. I know as a designer maker on a small batch scale and working alone that my options and needs are massively different to a designer of, for example, iPhones or Nike trainers. Working in mass manufacture may allow access to a larger range of raw materials, technology, and processes. Also, as we are becoming more and more aware, many large companies now design for disposability or obsolescence. Your phone will start to slow down or crash very handily after your contract ends. Oh dear, I now must get a new snazzy phone. Interestingly though, I've recently discovered that you can now have the option of buying refurbished phones. So maybe this is the start of the change. As a small scale designer and maker, my options are different. Sometimes these are self-imposed. For example, I choose to use toxic-free processes and only materials that are repairable, recyclable, or easily biodegrade. This limits me in many ways, but not only does it fit into my ethics as a designer, but as many of us know, placing restrictions on the creative process helps fuel it, as one of my favourite proverbs explains. My options as a small-scale designer are sometimes imposed upon me, often due to economic constraints and access to various technologies, etc. But again, as an individual, it is easier to use these as creative challenges. It has also been mooted by those in the industry that it is the small-scale businesses, inventors, designers, and craftspeople who are often at the forefront of change, not only because they are perhaps young startup businesses with fresh contemporary ideas, but because they are like young green tree stems, flexible and growing easily to wherever directed. As COVID has demonstrated this past year, many large-scale businesses have crashed and burned as their systems are so big and concreted into their day-to-day running. It is hard to adapt and be flexible to such extraordinary circumstances. These are the old trees of the business world, rigid, sturdy trunks with roots deeply embedded. I have seen many small businesses over the last year adapt and offer alternative services or goods to a community that allow them to work within the extraordinary COVID restrictions and to the demands of this new normality. It is the small-scale inventors, creatives and organisations, as so often is the case throughout history, that are leading the change in sustainable design. Their explorations tend to focus on 4 different areas of material usage: raw, repair, recycle, grow. So let's begin with looking at the raw material and how it's been used in this new exciting venture of sustainability in design. As a small-scale designer, I'm mainly buying materials from suppliers, often in small quantities, according to my design budget and need. But I am curious about producing or sourcing my own raw material. For example, I'm hoping to investigate more local materials in my design explorations. Now I am based in a North Yorkshire farming town. Maybe I can experiment with transforming sheep's fleeces or agricultural waste, reducing both the transport and production impacts and costs of already bought material, and gaining more control over the process as it goes through. It would also allow me more creativity starting with the raw material. What processes do I put it through to create this new material or product? Heating, moulding, washing, crushing, or mixing with binders. Experimenting and exploring and allowing the raw materials to show me what they can do. And on a bit of a side note, one of the most important things I've learned as an artist and a designer is really observe your material when you work with it. It will show you what it is happy doing or when you've pushed it too far, just like people. For example, a certain level of heat added to a material will transform its texture or its colour beautifully. A little bit too much heat and whoosh, it's gone, burnt to a crisp. Solid Wool started business a few years ago, exploring this local and widely available resource of sheep's fleeces. Our small market town, once a thriving part of the woolen industry, had grown quiet as the manufacturing had left, taking the heart of the town with it. We had an idea. If we could find a new way of working with wool, then perhaps we could bring some of this industry back. We learned that the coarse wool from hill-farmed upland sheep had dramatically lost its value in recent years. Historically used in the UK carpet industry, demand had declined and the wool was now considered almost worthless, a byproduct of sheep farming. We had the wool, now to find a use for it. Something which would reinvent this wool and give it value once again, to take the unwanted and to make it beautiful. So we started to play, to turn the way we have always worked with wool on its head. The end result is solid wool, a strong, beautiful and unique composite material. Think fiberglass, but with wool. These wool fleeces are transformed into practical, durable and beautiful everyday items, but also as importantly, socioeconomics is at play here. Community, the local economy and local resources add to the bigger picture of the aspirations of this young business. I applaud this approach. It feels like sustainable design at its fullest. This method of casting and moulding raw materials or waste materials as a composite by mixing with a non-toxic binder has become a very accessible way of producing viable eco-products. Here we see egg and nutshells by Shell Homage, pine needles by Tamara Ojolo, and a new startup initiative called chipboards. Yes, this is a chipboard alternative made of potatoes. This method is also one that has been used for many years by the cork industry, which we are most commonly used to seeing in this form. Granulated bits of cork compressed into sheets, tiles, bottle stoppers, to name just a few. But did you know that cork is a bark? And it aids the cork tree's health to remove the bark every 12 years, adding to its environmental credentials. It goes through various transformations as a material, starting here.
Although the ancient Greeks and Romans knew about the value of cork bark, it only began to be harvested commercially in Portugal about 300 years ago. It's still done by teams of men using hand axes, and no viable mechanical method has yet been invented to do the job as effectively.
This bark can be worked with minimal interference through slicing and compressing to create materials such as fabric, as we have here, and beads and balls. Remnants of this cork production are then moulded and compressed together to produce products of various size grains, from the chunky to the fine. There is no waste material. Here we have the chunky grains made into a stopper, and then medium-sized grains and fine grains as coasters and mats. The magical thing about the moulding of cork is that in some cases it does not need added binders or glue. The tree resin remaining in the bark will act like a glue under intense heat and steam, allowing the cork granules to be compressed under great pressure and then left to cool, binding everything together as a single form. This is the attraction of cork for me as a medium in my work. Everything is contained in the raw material very neatly. One problem, though, for me is that Portugal is the land of cork trees. There's not so many in Yorkshire, and this does not help the carbon footprint. Here are some other makers utilising natural resources, and resources a little closer to each of their habitats. Jasmine Linnington and Violaine Buet are both designers exploring the potential of seaweed as a fabric source, turning this often damp seaside vegetable into delicate and beautiful fabrics and sequins. Fernand Lepos utilises corn industry waste, which is produced in vast quantities in his home country of Mexico. He creates a marquetry effect using the husks as veneers, generating gorgeously textured, colourful and crisply aesthetic surfaces. He is charging ahead as a designer to watch and is now working with naturally dyed sisal and dried loofahs to create installations and objects of practical use. Now, sustainability in design isn't always about the experimental. We can cast our eye back over the history of the object and age-old techniques that are still enormously important and relevant today throughout the world. Here we see a Victorian woodworker, a Maasai drinking vessel from a gourd, an African tribal dwelling, and traditional Japanese packaging. Techniques and materials of great relevance in our quest for a more ecologically sound world. We will now look at the work of these two design houses, Sebastian Cox and Forest and Found, who explore the traditional in technique and the locality of raw materials. Sebastian Cox is maybe a name you have heard of, a maker of fine furniture, often gracing the pages of interior magazines and Sunday supplements. Not only does he work as a designer, but environmentalism is close to his heart, and he undertakes many projects that educate about and harness the practices of sustainability. His studio practice places great importance on preserving ancient woodworking crafts while investigating newer experimental techniques, and has been successful in collaborating with larger companies, creating a strong brand for himself and the studio whilst retaining their strong ethical practices. The studio work uses coppiced wood from the woodlands that they manage in Kent to create traditionally handcrafted and elegant furniture. Coppicing is a woodland management technique of repeatedly felling trees at the base and allowing them to regrow. In order to provide a sustainable supply of timber, this practice has a number of benefits over replanting, as the felled trees already have developed root systems, making regrowth quicker and absorbing CO2 in the process. So this kind of timber harvesting is not deforesting land. It is helping capture more CO2 from our climate and creating a constantly renewable raw material. Timber harvesting, as we know, can swing from the destruction of highly prized woodland and the ecological systems within them through to the responsible management of resources, as shown here by Sebastian Cox and his team. But again, this is not a black and white argument. not that I am at all endorsing the destruction of forests. The handcrafted item made by the sustainable designer maker usually comes with a price tag that many just can't afford. And this is where either the second-hand market or mass manufacture comes in. IKEA being a prime example as affordable off-the-peg products. IKEA and other such global companies cannot physically work in the way the Sebastian Koch studio does, hand-compassing and handcrafting products that take a period of time to make. But they can work responsibly with both the materials they work with and the processes they undergo. Mass deforestation of non-FSC woodland may no longer be a way forward, but there are alternatives, as we are discovering here and seeing more of in our day-to-day lives. The rise of bamboo, paper instead of plastic, and compostable starch bags that your Sunday paper sometimes arrives in. These large brands are the old, rigidly sound tree trunks I spoke of earlier. Their manufacturing systems do take longer to change, if not just by the sheer scale of them. It won't happen overnight, but it must happen. I know IKEA, as an example, has taken on a sustainability pledge to cut greenhouse gases by 80% by 2030. This pledge forms part of IKEA's wider ambition to turn the world's biggest furniture group into what they call a people and planet positive business. Let's hope this goal is taken seriously and that other mass manufacturers are following suit. As Sebastian talks of in his monthly column in the magazine Homes and Gardens, he talks of people power in the drive for mass manufacturing change. Accumulated consumer spending can become more potent than an election ballot when it comes to environmental issues, because companies are listening. Microvotes like these have been contributing to a feedback loop between consumers, companies, and legislators, with businesses now so attuned to our preferences and motivations to buy that the loop is shorter and faster paced than 5-year electoral cycles. So before we go to vote with our credit cards, let's get back to some more examples of individual practices in the sustainable design world. Forest and Found, aka Max Bainbridge and Abigail Booth, cross the boundaries of art and craft, using wood and textiles as their mediums. They both work with enormous awareness of the materials they are handling. Max's wooden vessels are exquisitely crafted, and when seen in the flesh are objects to drink up aesthetically with our eyes, but also instinctively you want to touch, as the form of the tree is still very prevalent. Abigail's working methods with her textiles bring handcrafting to the fore, sourcing various organic materials such as dyes, including clay from outside their studio, bone and tannins, to more traditional dye stuffs from nature, as her book Wild Dyer documents. She calls her hand-stitched quilt works paintings that are as at home displayed on walls to admire as adorning a bed for warmth. To me, Forest and Found have elements of Japanese design philosophies running through their work, utilising age-old techniques and materials, but mixing this with a fresh contemporary take on their crafts. This seamlessly takes us on to the next chapter, staying on the topic of Japanese design, specifically in the context of wabi-sabi. Wabi-sabi is rooted in Zen Buddhism and is the appreciation of things that are impermanent, imperfect, and incomplete. It celebrates the beauty and that which is natural, not despite its flaws, but because of them. These flaws could come from the maker's hand or the history of an object, such as the marks of its use or its repair. Wabi-sabi is becoming increasingly popular here in the West as a trend and as a form of sustainability. Make to amend if you like, but beautifully done with a sympathetic eye to composition and colour. Sashiko is a form of patchworking and darning as displayed in this gorgeous jacket by Vintage Custom Man. And kintsugi, or golden joinery, is the repair of ceramics using lacquers mixed with metallic powders. Repair and extending the life of an object is used with a very different visual form here in the project Joining Bottles by Michaela Pedros. Here she is in action. This project is pretty ingenious, not only recycling waste, plastic and wood, or repairing quickly and durably, it is readily accessible, as noted here on her website. Both materials, wood and plastic bottles, are widely abundant in cities and other places. They are lying there as waste, waiting to be reclaimed by people. Socioeconomics at play again here. Perhaps, though, this is too rough and ready an aesthetic for some. Here we have a small company who utilise repair on a much larger commercial scale. Wright Denim are a jeans manufacturers in Wales. Like solid wool, these innovators jumped on the idea of bringing an industry back to a town. They also make us think about the jeans beyond their manufacture and help us keep them lasting as long as possible by offering a repairs for life scheme. I personally loved this idea so much when I discovered it, I borrowed it myself for my business. Now let's move on to chapter 3. Recycling is commonplace in our culture in many ways, from upcycling projects, eBay, vintage apps and charity shops fueling second-hand purchases, to the supposed recycling of our everyday waste. I say supposed as it isn't always as green as we expect, sometimes adding to climate change rather than aiding it. As quoted from this Wired article, the UK is in the habit of outsourcing its recycling to other nations. A report from the National Audit Office found that more than half of the packaging designated as recycled is actually sent abroad for processing without the guarantee that it will be recycled rather than burned or placed in landfills. For example, a Friends of the Earth report highlighted large quantities of plastic being burned at a paper mill in Indonesia because it had incorrectly been labelled as paper by British sorting machines. In the year ending in October 2018, the UK exported 611,000 tonnes of recovered plastic packaging to other countries. Among the top 4 destination countries were Malaysia and Indonesia, both of which have some of the highest rates of plastic ocean pollution. If, like me, facts like this make you angry and feel paralysed in how to change these big systems, we need to take a deep breath and remember that do what we can do. Stay angry and use it positively to try and make change happen. From reducing single plastic packaging, shopping as responsibly as we can, and constantly questioning where things come from and where they will go. People power. Many small actions can lead to a great change. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox now and back to some of those people making that change. Waste fabric and clothing is literally piling up on this planet, often laced with plastics and materials that will take an eternity to biodegrade. But fabric is something so many of us can work with, upcycle, reutilise and repair. I hear stories of my grandma turning sleeves of jumpers so the worn elbows sat on the inside. Just like my observations in India, extending the life of objects due to practicality and economic necessity. Designers such as Psychic Outlaw and Bethany Williams take existing fabrics, including quilts, packaging bags, and old worn garments, and turn them into new apparel, transforming them in appearance. But designers like Sophie Rowley and Jorg Panardus convert textile waste till it is no longer recognised. Like we saw in our Raw chapter with brands such as Solid Wool and Shell Homage, waste materials here are pressed and squeezed into moulds with various binding substances to create texturally and visually fascinating objects. Here we have denim seating by Rowley and furniture composed of solid batons in Panarda's structural skin range. Batons composed of leather offcuts, soaked, compressed and left to set, then bolted together to create linear, elegant structures. Textile waste is also being used on a much more industrial scale in many areas. It can be made into insulation and composite panels for the building industry, as the textile manufacturer Kvadrat are producing here from their own production waste. Building materials are an excellent way of recycling waste, as they often take the form of flat panels or blocks and can be hidden away in the structure of houses. Here we have wood waste by Ferezzo, stone cycling, and the Good Plastic Company's rainbow collections of recycled plastic sheets. Here, with the social enterprise Waterhole, they create sunglasses from old fishing nets retrieved from the sea and beaches. As with the paper brand G.F. Smith Papers, I wonder if Waterhole hope that their business at some point will no longer be needed, on an environmental slant that is. G.F. Smith launched their extract paper range, utilising recycled coffee cups a few years ago. When I discovered this range, which I now use in my own product packaging, I assumed all paper coffee cups were recyclable. No, they have plastics bound into them. At the time, G.F. Smith used the only 3 mills in the country that could separate the plastic and paper, allowing both the paper and the plastic to be recycled. Here was born the extract range, a range of papers in different colours that they hope will become obsolete as the need to recycle single-use coffee cups becomes an archaic process. So let's move from the archaic to peek into the future, our final chapter, grow. Is this the future of manufacturing? Growing only the section and size of material we need. No more waste, no energy-heavy processes such as constructing, dyeing and finishing fabrics using gallons of water. 425 million each day by the textiles industry. Suzanne Lee is a pioneer and researcher in biofabrics. These are fabrics that are grown. Here, she has created a fashion range using the fermented tea kombucha to scientifically grow the fabric, almost like a mould on the surface, to the precise amount needed for each garment, efficiency to its fullest. Here, we have a vegan alternative to leather, also grown by the brand Milo Unleather, but this time using mushrooms, or as you may have heard already of this material, mycelium. Here's an intro to it.
At Grown.bio, we use nature's intelligence to make products. In fact, we use mycelium, which is the roots of mushrooms. Mycelium has remarkable properties. These properties have evolved during already millions of years before us. And it is this ancient knowledge of the mycelium that allows us to build bridges between nature and technology.
Mycelium became hot in the sustainable design world a few years ago. It grows around an organic binder such as agricultural waste and grows into its mould to create whatever shape is required. It is cheap, strong and fairly quick to produce, so can be used for not only higher end products but also disposable packaging, as it can be composted easily and quickly. With these materials, we are not taking precious resources from the planet, we are cultivating them. And not only this, they can be good friends with this common garden object when their time is up. One mycelium item you may never want to compost though is this extraordinary 3D printed chair by the designer Eric Clarenbeek, as he explains. The mycelium grew within the structure, replacing the water and creating a solid but extremely lightweight material. Mushrooms began sprouting on the surface, at which point it was dried out to present further growth. So to conclude our little journey into the sustainable and the circular, let's revisit some wise words from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. The circular economy is a blueprint for a new sustainable economy, one that has innovation and efficiency at its heart, and addresses the business challenges presented by continued economic unpredictability, exponential population growth, and our escalating demand on the world's natural resources. So let's stay green with anger, stay positive and stay curious. Let's challenge the status quo and disrupt the old systems, thinking carefully about what we use and how we use it, consuming, living and designing for a better world. Thank you. For further resources on this talk, plus extra ones, you can email me for a range of websites, online talks and publications to explore, or you can check out my Instagram feed for images and tags to a range of designers, materials and organisations. All the details are in the links below. Thank you.